Hello, my name is Linda Cabot and I am the president and founder of Bowsey Ocean Awareness Programs. I know that we're getting folks from all over the globe. It'll be great if in the chat just say hello. I also wanted to say hello to all those teachers and students who'll be watching this as a recording at a future date. And just as a reminder for everybody tonight, the series is being recorded. So tonight we are so thrilled to be talking about Entangled, the new award-winning documentary for our Water Wednesday webinar. This is truly an extraordinary film that examines the plight of the North Atlantic right whale, one of the most critically endangered species in the world, if not the most endangered. The film is really special because it's about great storytelling and it renders all the various complicated issues that surround the right whale. But it's done in such a balanced way that invites both empathy for the right whale and concern about the coastal communities who depend on lobstering for livelihood. So it's a real honor to have the filmmaker here with us tonight, David Abel. He is the director, producer, writer, filmmaker of Entangled. He is also a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter for the Boston Globe, who covers fisheries, climate change, and other environmental issues. David is both a reporter and a wonderful storyteller, as seen through all his many films. He co-directed and produced Sacred Cod. This is a film about the collapse of the iconic cod fishery in New England, which was broadcast on the Discovery Channel. He also directed and produced 2 films about the Boston Marathon bombings, which were broadcast both internationally and nationally. His other films include Lobster War and Gladsman, The Last Sawgrass Cowboys. Tonight, we also have Erica Fuller joining us. Erica is a senior attorney at the Conservation Law Foundation's Oceans Program. She joined CLF, or the Conservation Law Foundation, after 8 years of being a litigator for Earth Justice. And she has 20 years of experience of being a large animal veterinarian. Her work now is focused on building a resilient marine ecosystem in the Northeast. A part of this work, she leads the Conservation Law Foundation's effort to protect the North Atlantic right whale. Some of these threats, or most of these threats, include entanglements, noise, and then also ship strikes. So we are thrilled to have her here to hear her expertise and her perspective about this iconic species. I did want to mention the Conservation Law Foundation is such an incredible environmental organization. Their mission is to protect New England's environment for all the people. We will be putting the link for the Conservation Law Foundation's website in the chat. And I would really encourage you to take a look and just to look at all the myriad of programs that they have to protect not only our oceans, but air. The Conservation Law Foundation is a real powerhouse in environmental activism and a hero of mine. Many of you know Bowsey and the work that we do with teens around the globe. Our strong belief in creative advocacy to create a healthier ocean and more sustainable world. In fact, Bowsey started with a documentary I made about 12 years ago about the Gulf of Maine. I made it with my 2 daughters, and I thought they would learn more about the environmental issues if they were part of the creative process. So they actually did some of the filming, they did narrations, and they interviewed some of the scientists that we spoke to. I truly believe in the power of great filmmaking to raise awareness about important environmental issues. So tonight's discussion will delve into the significance of really effective science communication and how creativity and documentary filmmaking has a special and historic role in environmental advocacy. So we're going to begin tonight's discussion by watching the trailer for Entangled, which will be followed by short presentations by both David and Erica. And then we will have a discussion before the Q&A at the end. But please remember that if you have not watched the film, you have a screening pass, I think until this Friday to watch it. And of course, there are many of other platforms afterwards that you can watch it on as well. And lastly, our Senior Vice President, Alyssa Irizarry, will be talking at the end about some of our Bowsey programs, and if you're a teacher or student, how you can become more involved in the work that we do and looking at some of our contest programs. So yeah, let's start with a trailer.
The right whale is an extraordinary creature. It's really one of the wonders of the living world. But if something in our management doesn't change, the direction of the population points to zero, and that's extinction.
The North Atlantic right whale is considered one of the most endangered species on the planet.
This will be the first large whale in modern history that would go extinct.
So 85% of the right whale population now bears scars that indicate entanglement injury. This was a big problem, and it's an urgent problem.
It's a tragedy that we're losing the right whales. It's emblematic of large-scale changes that are happening on the planet.
Human beings can exist without biodiversity, and this is maybe a harbinger of where we're going.
We need to put as much pressure as we can on the agency to step up and take action right now.
I don't think the urgency can be overstated.
Human action is killing these whales, and human action has the ability to save them.
Lobstermen are stewards of the sea, and they don't want to entangle anything.
I sat here and listened to environmentalist after environmentalist tell me what a murderous individual I am.
My opinion about the whales is fuck them. What more can we do? Eventually, they're going to die off. It's going to happen no matter what.
As your governor, I will do everything I can to defend Maine's lobster industry in the face of this absurd federal overreach.
The challenge is to find ways for the fishing industry and the right whales to coexist in the same waters.
NOAA is the fox guarding the chicken coop. You're going to be fired for being a liar and a person who works to kill off the right whale.
One of the problems is that fisheries are one of the main factors that are endangering protected species. You end up with one organisation deeply conflicted with its mission.
Linda, I think you're muted.
I was saying that's so powerful, but David, it'd be great to hear more about how it was making the film and your experience, making it, and would be great to hear from you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda, for organizing this, and Alyssa for organizing this. Erica, of course, as always, great to see you and be with you. So it's nice to be gathered, at least virtually, with everybody. Sad that we can't all be together in person. One day, hopefully, that will again be possible. I just wanted to start off by saying a few things about what inspired this film and how this film came to be. And I would just say that there was kind of a confluence of things that suddenly made me realize that this would be an important film to tell. And I would say one of the first things was almost 2 years ago, I was fortunate to be asked to judge a Bowsey competition, an artwork competition about right whales. And I had the very difficult task of looking at all of this unbelievable artwork and poetry and videos, and I was asked to try to assign some kind of scoring to them, and it seemed like an impossible task because you know, each one blew me away. But as I was immersed in just seeing these arresting images painted by 7th graders or poems written by high school students, I just was really deeply moved. And I thought after several years of covering right whales as a reporter at the Boston Globe in a kind of piecemeal way, I thought maybe maybe it'd be worth making a film about this issue. And around that time, there was a report that was published by the United Nations that estimated that by the end of this century, we are on target to lose roughly 1 million species as a result of climate change. And I've said this before, but I was really aghast at this report and also challenged by writing a story about it for the paper that could only capture, you know, in a very limited way, the scale of loss of the biodiversity of this planet. And I thought, how do you appropriately tell the story of extinction, of mass extinction? And I thought maybe we should tell this story through one species, one particularly iconic species. And of course, it seemed that the right subject for me as the environment reporter at the Boston Globe would be the North Atlantic right whale. And that's sort of, and around that time as well, we saw the start of a bureaucratic process, which is chronicled in the film, called the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team. And through that, there was an effort to try to bring together all kinds of stakeholders, from fishermen and federal and state regulators to scientists and conservation groups. And it was a really fascinating thing to watch, because here were people from very different stations in life and different interests trying to figure out how to thread the needle of trying to reduce harm and mortality to this whale whose numbers had been plummeting, and also try not to harm what is a vital industry and a vital part of our heritage, our economy, and our traditions here in New England, the lobster industry. And I thought actually, shortly after I started making this film, that I had the end of the film, which comes now in the middle part of the film, which was what seemed to be this historic agreement where all of a sudden this group of some 60 stakeholders, all but one of them approved what seemed to be historic measures that this federal government estimated would reduce mortality and serious injuries by some 60% of North Atlantic right whales. I'm sure Erica will say that is nowhere enough, and you know, even that agreement was not sufficient to the needs. But it was really the most significant action to date for an effort to try to turn the tide. And of course, as anyone who's watched the film knows, that that agreement was suddenly basically cast away by protests in Maine. And there were great fights and lawsuits threatened. And that path played out. And that was a really good means of me trying to chronicle this story. I could go on, but I think I should probably yield the floor, and I'm happy to answer questions about what's happened since the end of since the film ended. I just end by saying that trying to end this film was very challenging because this is still very much an unfolding story, and the effort to try to create regulation to protect the whales was dragged out for nearly 2 years. And it wasn't until on December 31st of last year that these proposed regulations emerged from this regulatory black hole that was sort of that it was kept in by the Trump administration, and only has since emerged. And I'm sure Erica can speak more thoughtfully about that and where things stand now. So I will, I'll shut my mouth and listen.
Well, thank you, David. And thank you, Linda, and everyone for joining us tonight. I hope I'm not going to bore you to death, but I am going to take just a few minutes to tell folks on the line that maybe are a little less familiar with right whales than those of us who sort of live and breathe and diet every minute, more about the status and more about all of our efforts to try and save this species from extinction, and not just that, but to try to rebuild it back to a sustainable population. Next slide, Alyssa. First, like, who are the right whales? Their Latin name is Eubalaena glacialis. It means true whales of the ice. Their nickname is the tube because they're built for distance and not speed. They should live 30 to 50 years, but they don't anymore. I mean, they should live 80 years, but they don't live much more than 30 to 50 years, with several deaths in the recent past of calves. And they roam the entire Atlantic seaboard from Florida up into the northern reaches of Canada. There are 3 things right whales can't live without. Next slide, Alyssa. They are food. They only eat these dense patches of tiny crustaceans called copepods. The ability to stay in constant communication with each other, especially because they don't live in pods like many of the other whale species that we're familiar with. And examples of that are that females will often migrate with their calves all the way down to Florida as a solo pair, but they communicate with another cow-calf pair as much as 10 miles away. And there are also sentinel whales that go into the Cape Cod Bay looking for food and then may come out to say yes or no food. That ability to communicate is compromised by increasing ocean noise. And the third thing they really need is their sag time. This is a picture of a surface active group. Right whales join these groups to socialize and feed, but they don't pay much attention to their surroundings when they're breeding, and need relatively undisturbed ocean waters so they don't get run over by a boat or entangled in fishing line. Next slide, Alyssa. But right whales are also called the urban whale, and that's because a portion of the population goes all the way down to winter calving grounds off the coast of Georgia and Florida, and then come back to the Northeast to feed. We thought of them for quite a long time as our New England whale, not going much farther than the Southern Maritimes in Canada. But as of 2017, they've been going all the way up into the Gulf of St. Lawrence through the Cabot Straits, where they're putting themselves at further increased risk. The picture on the right just shows some of the offshore wind development along the Atlantic seaboard. That also poses increased noise and chances of an encounter with a vessel along the entire Atlantic seaboard. some might ask, why should we save whales? And you know, for many of us, just the protection of biodiversity is really important. But in addition to that, they are a really rich part of New England's history. Not only did their oil provide light for hundreds of years, but their baleen was used in hats and corsets to provide support, and almost every part of their body was used for a couple hundreds of years. But they also play a critical role in our ecosystem now. Thanks in part to whales, the ocean produces over 50% of the Earth's oxygen. And hopefully this is not too graphic, but whales won't poop at the surface. I mean, under pressure, so at the very bottom. So they come to the surface and cycle nutrients that they bring from the bottom up to the surface, where they fertilize the phytoplankton that lives there. And that phytoplankton uses those nutrients plus sunlight and CO2 for photosynthesis. This creates the oxygen. It feeds the fisheries that commercial fisheries depend upon, and it fights climate change. And their job is not done while they're alive. Once they die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean and become a huge carbon sink and provide new habitat for other species. It's estimated that every whale is worth approximately $2 million today in the ecosystem services that they provide. So what are their main threats and where are they? Like I said, whales were hunted to near extinction by whaling communities beginning in the late 1600s. Gloucester, Nantucket, and New Bedford were the big three. But with the advent of oil and gas, the demand for whale oil waned and fishing protections increased. By the early 1970s, they were protected under both the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Protection Act. The goal of listing a species on the Endangered Species Act is to recover it and delist it. But unfortunately, right whales have never lost their endangered status, primarily because of entanglements in commercial fishing gear and ship strikes. During different periods of time, the threats have been more prevalent in the US versus Canada, but over the last decade, we've been running pretty much neck and neck. Between 2010 and 2019, about 55% of the serious injury and mortalities were first documented in Canada and about 45% in the US. That said, just because it's the country where that entanglement might first be documented doesn't necessarily mean that's where the entanglement occurred. You know, as this dotted line shows, due to protections and several lawsuits, the population grew to nearly 500 animals in 2010 when it started a pretty steep nosedive. Several factors have contributed to their decline. First, fewer births. Right whales feed on, you know, those dense patches of copepods that I described earlier. But those patches are highly sensitive to climate change, and with warming waters, right whales were suddenly forced to move and to use a lot more energy to find that food. And second, more deaths. And starting in the early 2000s, the lobster fishery, which had traditionally fished pretty close to shore, moved offshore and started using heavier ropes, which posed a bigger threat to right whales. And adding to that, sometime around 2017, an increasing number of right whales began to go up into that Gulf of St. Lawrence through the Cabot Strait, where they were exposed to a lot of shipping traffic, much more than they were exposed to even before going into Canada and the Great Lakes, and a new sort of burgeoning snow crab fishery there that used really heavy gear as well. The most recent population estimates from 2019 identified only 366 individuals remaining now, and this represents a population decrease of about 24%. That's a substantial decrease in the population size. So what's also really important to remember is that there's only somewhere between 75 and 90 reproductively viable females remaining in the population. So there's a really urgent need to protect females. as these slides show, the cow on the top is likely to give a lot more births than the entangled cow on the bottom. Thus, ending entanglements is essential. But I want to point out that entanglements are a tragic accident. Nobody intends to entangle right whales. Fishermen must mark the gear on the bottom that lies on the bottom on the surface with markings so that other fishermen can see where it is and not set on top of it. But essentially any vertical line in the water that connects something weighted to the bottom to the surface poses a risk. And it's estimated that there's more than 1 million lines in their migratory and feeding routes in the US alone. Once right whales hit a line, they often panic and they roll and tumble and they either drown, break free, or drag along line and gear for days, weeks, or even years. This is the result. This right whale was first seen entangled in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in August 2018. That's its baleen sticking out of its mouth on the left. And as bad as it looks, remarkably, there were gear-free sightings of this whale in December of that same year, which is an unusual outcome. Unfortunately, 85% of right whales bear entanglement scars, 60% have been entangled more than once, and only about 1% of the entanglements can be identified to an actual fishery so that we can make changes in the future. Another big threat is ship strikes, because right whales are dependent upon those copepods. They feed mostly on the surface of the water column. And because they tend to move slowly, they're super difficult to spot with a boat, even under good sea conditions. So that makes them especially prone to ship strikes. And ships of all sizes pose a threat, although we generally think of tankers as the biggest threat. In two of the last year's calves, 2 of only 10, were killed by recreational boaters in boats less than 65 feet. Additional mandatory speed limits are required in the US and Canada, and currently the federal government requires them in a few places, but only seasonally and not often enough are they mandatory. The result is that CLF has recently sued the federal government along with our partners for additional protections from vessel strikes. This is a picture of a necropsy being performed on a beach. Next slide, Alyssa. So what's needed? We need to dramatically reduce the number of vertical lines in the water column throughout the Atlantic seaboard, but particularly in the Northeast. There's a certain part of southern New England, just south of Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket, that's been identified recently as a year-round foraging habitat. We need to do a lot more protections in that area, both speed limits and getting line out of the water. We need to ensure that the gear is marked a lot more sufficiently and with specificity so that there isn't that just 1% of all, entangled whales that we can figure out where it came from. And we need to ask Congress to fund a lot more ropeless fishing trials. I'll get to that in just a minute. CLF's right whale campaign has 5 prongs: litigation, mitigation, legislation, communication, and collaboration. We have filed several lawsuits, which David alluded to, seeking additional protections, both from entanglements and ship strikes. We work with our partners and offshore wind developers to minimize the harm to right whales there, including like seasonal restrictions on pile driving, enhanced monitoring, and the use of passive acoustic buoys so we know where and when right whales are there. With respect to legislation, we've worked with several partners to obtain bipartisan support for the Save Right Whale Act, which is going to be reintroduced into Congress again in a few months. And we have worked on efforts to advance ropeless fishing systems that need critical funding from Congress if that bill passes. We do a lot to communicate on this issue. Imagery is huge, as David alluded to. We have previously produced videos on the plight of right whales and have more to come. We've published blogs, infographics on our website. We post on social media. We do presentations like this one, and we are in the news fairly frequently related to our litigation. But what you can do may be more helpful and just as helpful in raising awareness among kids and among folks that we perhaps don't reach. So I want to get to our collaboration with fishermen because I think this is really important. Starting about a year ago, we made an concerted effort to collaborate with fishermen, scientists, engineers, and other NGOs to promote ropeless fishing. It's our view that until effective, affordable, and available modified gear is required, closing fishing grounds is probably the only meaningful solution to reduce this chance of extinction. It results in a choice between huge economic losses to fishermen and the communities that they live in, or to watch the extinction of a magnificent species. The recovery may well hinge on broad-scale use of ropeless fishing. And although it's been tested or used more widely in other parts of the country, it's only this year that trials in the Northeast have begun in earnest. And here's how it works. Ropeless fishing systems allow traps on the seafloor to be remotely called up to the surface using acoustic technologies that eliminate the need for having those permanent vertical lines in the water. And there's 3 different systems that are making progress now. Some of them use stowed rope and a buoy in what looks just like a lobster trap on the bottom. Others use a lift bag connected to the outside of the last trap. And some have stowed rope on a buoy that comes to the surface. And they all have some kind of GPS marking so that the fisherman knows where to go back to when he goes to retrieve that system. So each of the systems contain an acoustic modem that sits in the floor, and fishermen also return using a second paired modem on their boat. And the high frequency waves from that modem essentially triggered the buoy, the lift bag, or the spool to come to the surface. And the traps are then hauled up using fairly traditional methods and a hauler. These systems are not ready for prime time tomorrow, but the advances that we've made in the last year through trials and gear modifications have upped the pace by which this is occurring by, in orders of magnitude. Now we can need to have a really strong will to solve this problem. There are still several challenges, a way through regulations, and enough money from Congress to ensure its success. What can you do? This gear is more geared. This slide is more geared to the kids in the group. But you can speak up, talk with your friends and family about right whales. Do a science project on right whales. Write a letter to your legislatures, and engage and follow us on social media. As David alluded to, there is an upcoming rulemaking coming up. CLF will be sending out an action alert with our exact stance on this, but as already been pointed out, it's our view that the rule is vastly insufficient to reduce the risk of entanglements to right whales. It aims at a target of 60% risk reduction that's probably not high enough. It's based on old population estimates, and it takes 10 years to reach a no jeopardy plateau, all of that, which is hugely problematic. So we will definitely, for anyone who would like to be on our email list that's not already on it, and we can provide a lot more details, please just put your address in the chat bar and we'll grab that and make sure you get that information. And thank you.
Great. Erica, thanks so much. That was just really very educating to listen to, and it's just very sad to see the drop in the numbers. Before we open it up to questions, I know that climate change played, David, a big role in the film as well. And today is sort of a big day for climate change with the Biden-Harris new executive orders that came out. And I was wondering, David, if you could talk a little bit about the impact that climate change has for the right whale.
Sure. So Erica alluded to this, but the role climate change is playing in this story is essentially the warming. So the Gulf of Maine, which is one of the primary places that that right whales feed in, is warming, has been warming faster than almost any other body of water on the planet. And that warming, according to scientists, has led to the population of Calanus finmarchicus, which is this rice-sized creature, a type of copepod that is the primary source of food for right whales. And that those copepods have declined by as much as 90% in the summer feeding grounds for the right whales, which is near the Bay of Fundy, in the sort of northeast part of the Gulf of Maine. And as a result of that decline, the whales went in search for Calanus and food elsewhere. And that's why in 2017, for the first time in anyone's memory, the right whales showed up in significant numbers in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And because they moved to a place where they had not been seen in any significant numbers before, there were no real protections for them there. And as a result, in 2017, we lost 12 right whales in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which was part of, I think, 17 that died that year, which was catastrophic, and I think the worst year on record for them. And so there were some protections at the end of the summer that were put in place, but those protections were eased after 2018, when the numbers declined. I don't think there were any right whale deaths in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in 2018. And then when there was a lot of pushback from crab fishermen and lobster fishermen along the Acadian coast in New Brunswick, the government eased their regulations a bit, and we saw 9 right whales in 2019 die. One of which, the first of which, we chronicle in the film. That was Wolverine. And so that's the primary role that climate change has played in this story. Maybe Erica can say more.
No, I think you covered it. I think the only other point I was trying to make in my presentation was that because they have to go so much farther in order to find these dense patches, it's a real energetic stress, and it results in them having less calves, just because of all the energy it takes to go so much farther.
And arguably, that is one reason that in 2018, on top of the catastrophic number of deaths in 2017, we saw for the first time 0 births in 2018, which perhaps was even more catastrophic for the species than the spate of deaths. So, and that has played out for a number of years. There's been a really small number of calves that have been born. This year, hopefully that trend is being reversed a bit. We've so far seen 14 calves born in the past 2 months. We're still in the midst of the breeding, the calving season, so it's conceivable that we'll see more calves. So there were actually 15 born. Sadly, the first that was born this year was the first known natural death of a right whale. As far as I've understood it, it was the first calf to be born was stillborn. And every other cause of death of a right whale since 2010, when there has been a cause of death determined, has been because of us, either because of entanglement in fishing gear or a vessel strike.
And I might just add to that, David. I haven't seen the pathology report on that calf, so I actually didn't know that it was stillborn, but it still might have been from human causes, because perhaps since we don't know who mom was, we don't know if mom was entangled, and that's why she perhaps, if it was stillborn, or whether mom was even hit by boat. It's not, neither of those are impossibilities yet.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about how important these protections are, and I was wondering if we could just talk about science communication, you know, the bridge between, or the gap between science and the public. And Erica, maybe you could talk a little bit, you know, what David has done to advance your work and sort of this partnership with raising awareness, sort of creative advocacy and public awareness.
Yeah, David's film highlighted some of the best and brightest scientists, I think, that exist in the right whale world. I don't want to leave any names out, so I'm not going to name them. But I think it's really helpful for the public to see like scientists on the back of a boat trying to find copepods. What do they look like? You know, pulling them up in a net, showing them, look how little they are. These huge animals have to exist on these tiny things the size of rice. So I think David's film did a fantastic job showing some of Amy's work and Michael Moore's work, you know, out in the field trying to make a difference. And I think we do use that science because the public, I think, is clamoring for understanding real science and getting real data and real facts to understand the issues. I don't think any of us want to be misled by what we think is like cookbook science. So, you know, I think David did a great job. He also did a good job, like telling the public about the threat so that when we bring these lawsuits and it sounds like sort of extraneous, you know, legal mumbo jumbo, that people understand this is the issue, this is the problem, and this is the pressure being put on the agency to take some action now. Now, do I wish that pressure were a lot faster? Yes. I feel like 3 years seems like a really long time to get to this place where we have a proposed rule. But in the absence of that litigation, I don't think we'd even be here yet.
Yeah. I mean, I
just want to note one thing that thank you for that, Erica. But I just want to make clear that I'm not an advocate. What Erica does is different than what I do, and so my goal is not to, you know, tell the public what to do. It's to cast a light on a thorny, difficult subject and try to portray in as fair a way as I possibly can, but also not hide from, you know, not make it just a he said, she said, but to point out what are the facts, what's known and what's not known. So we do different things, but I just wanted to be clear that I'm not an advocate.
Yeah, no, it's what was so beautiful about it is that it has such a balance of understanding the real difficulty of the problem between the coastal communities and the right whale. And I think more than anything else, the storytelling just creates empathy in people and interest. And I think that's a really wonderful thing and an important thing. So,
and that is, I think, what as a journalist and a filmmaker, that's what we're trying to do. Our hope is that if you treat each of the subjects fairly and hear them out and tell their stories in a humane, thoughtful way, you bring people and make accessible subjects that people might otherwise tune out or not, you know, have an interest in.
Yeah. And I know, well, we're coming on, we have 10 minutes left, and I know that there's some questions. And Alyssa, I don't know if you've been seeing any of the questions in the chat, but it would be great to hear some of them.
We've got a couple questions. We kind of spoke to some of these, but Natalie wanted to know if there's hope for the ropeless fishing technique that was talked about in the film, but also Erica, you mentioned, is there hope for that to be, being used more widely? And if so, maybe what that timescale looks like.
I would just note, sorry,
Okay.
I'm just going to note one thing, and then I'm going to leave it to Erica to explain. But just this week, so the state of Massachusetts, as part of this larger federal effort, has introduced a raft of new rules to try to mitigate the impact of Massachusetts fishermen, particularly lobster fishermen and gillnet fishermen, on right whales. And initially they proposed regulations that would have banned lobster fishing in all of state waters for several months of the year, I think February through May. And that would have been an expansion of one of the closures that we highlight in the film that centers on Cape Cod Bay. But just recently, and I'll leave it to Erica to explain, after a lot of pressure brought by Erica and others in the conservation community, there is now, I think, a provision or a promise to legalize or to allow for ropeless fishing, which technically is currently illegal in Massachusetts, because to work as a lobsterman, you need to operate under a specific license, and that license only allows you to use certain gear, and that's vertical buoy lines. But maybe Erica can sort of explain in some more depth what the state is suggesting they might allow.
Yeah, thank you, David. Well, first, to speak to the initial question asked, yes, I think there's lots of reasons for hope. I can't believe the progress we've made in just 1 year of testing and trials in the Northeast. Not that there aren't several challenges that remain, not that there aren't things that we need to do, but it is looking like a feasible way to fish in many parts of the fishery. In terms of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I believe that they received a grant from NIFWF, the National Wildlife Federation, that allows them to kind of spend the next year looking at the feasibility of ropeless fishing before they change their regulations related to that. But you can still fish with a letter of authorization, which is what you need to fish in state waters, or an exempted fishing permit if you wanted to fish in federal waters. One of those permitting things are so onerous that to my knowledge, it's prevented people from trying the gear. It's been as much, how do we get gear into the hands of fishermen? How do we move along economies of scale to get the price down? How do we solve the gear conflict issues with other fisheries, which is perhaps one of the biggest things. I can give a plug for the Northeast Fisheries Science Center here that they've been adding to their gear cache warehouse over this year. There's a tremendous amount of gear out there that's been funded through both private philanthropic donations and from federal dollars to get gear into the hands of fishermen and all different kinds. There are probably 8 or 9 manufacturers at this point in time whose gear is being tested in various parts of the US and Canada. And there are several reasons for hope. I don't want anyone to think that there's not. But however, the window of time on a species that's projected to potentially be extinct in 20 years doesn't allow us to develop the technology at a really slow pace. So it's important for all of us to keep pressure on everybody we can keep pressure on to get Congress to fund this, to get new technologies developed, and to continue moving this along as quickly as possible.
And I would just add that it is, while the technology seems to be promising, it is the financing aspect is daunting. And if you talk to the fishermen, many of them will poke holes in the existing technology and raise all kinds of concerns about how it would operate, you know, in a world where they have to collect some 800 traps per fisherman, scattered among, you know, thousands, tens of thousands of traps by fellow fishermen, and trying to figure out whose is whose is an issue that they have raised repeatedly. But beyond that, the ultimate issue is that, you know, a lot of fishermen are just making ends meet often, and they have a lot of expenses, and the notion that they would be able to afford or voluntarily start using gear that is difficult to use and would cost them at current rates tens of thousands of dollars seems completely unlikely, with one exception, as Erica alluded to, which is if we go the way that we have gone for the agricultural industry, which we have subsidized with billions of dollars. Maybe, you know, our lawmakers will recognize the value of maintaining this vital fishery and sustaining this critically endangered species through trying to finance the transition of the fishery to ropeless.
Yeah, I mean, I think that begs the sort of decision I spoke about at the very end. Like, do we let this magnificent species go extinct, or do we close all these vast areas to fishing? And I think ropeless fishing holds the promise that we need. And that's why people are working, lots and lots of people are working day and night to try to solve this problem. I think, you know, I've never personally been involved in anything with so many people working so hard to try to get this moving quickly. Because in the absence of ropeless fishing, it's just big closures to fishing.
Erica, can you speak to breakaway lines, fishing lines, in the meantime, but before ropeless can be really rolled out?
Yeah, so one of the short-term solutions that's been proposed is to use either weak line or weak ropes. And the idea is that there has been a scientific paper published that shows that of the rope that's taken off of whales, most of the whales break free if the rope is less than 1,700 pounds of breaking strength. Amy Knowlton at the New England Aquarium has worked with fishermen to develop what's called the South Shore sleeve, which is a weak link. I think there's been lots of hope around a weak rope, especially if it could be marked appropriately so we'd know what it was. But to my knowledge, there's not any manufacturers that make that weak rope. The new rule coming out from NIMS relies heavily on weak rope and on ways such as the South Shore sleeve to weaken the fishing rope. Amongst the conservation community, there's varying opinions about whether this is a good short-term or long-term or even medium-term solution. The advantages are obviously that some whales may break free. The disadvantages are that turtles and other whales like calves and minke whales probably aren't going to break free, and it's still rope in the water. But you know, I would speaking on CLF's behalf, I would say that the reliance in this new rule coming out on dramatically just weakening rope but not removing rope from the water is problematic from our perspective. Although, you know, we definitely respect that people are using it, and it might save some whales.
I would just add that it's not hypothetical. I mean, this is being used. The fishermen that we chronicle
It is being used, but it's not proven to be effective to save whales.
Right.
Well, I know we're coming up towards the end, and I guess I just feel like the climate change problem, that often sort of human interests are pitted against the environment and animals. But then, you know, when you think about hope and you think about human innovation and technology, hearing about the ropeless gear, I know that we're some time away from it, but I feel like, you know, there could be some solution there that could actually benefit the fishermen as well as the right whales. And I'm just hoping that human tech and human innovation can really solve this problem for everybody. But thank you, David. Thank you, Erica. It was really informative. And I know that students will really love hearing about this on a recording as well. So thank you. And I think, Alyssa, do you mind just talking about the Ocean Awareness Contest?
Yeah, so for those of you who are not as familiar with Bowsey, if you were inspired by what you heard about tonight, we really encourage you to check out Bowsey's annual Ocean Awareness Contest, which is open through June. So if you're a student or an educator, or a student or an educator, please encourage them to check this out. This year's theme is Water Rising, which invites students to explore and understand their connection to water, and to really communicate creatively the need to protect this incredibly precious resource and this life-sustaining relationship. And the contest is open to students that are ages 11 through 18 worldwide, and they can submit visual art, film, interactive, multimedia, music, dance, poetry, and spoken word and creative writing. And we also have a free online resource studio with lesson plans, multimedia, articles, games, lots more. And we also offer $750 awards for participating educators who use the Ocean Awareness Contest as a teaching tool in their classroom. And last but not least, students can also earn cash awards up to $1,500. And we are very excited this year to offer the new We All Rise Prize for US students who identify as Black, Indigenous, or Latinx, as well as the new Voice of the Sea Award for spoken word poetry. And we are collaborating with artist educators to create some really exciting programming around these initiatives, including our next Water Wednesdays webinar, which will feature our partner, the poet, educator, and activist Taylor Johnson, who will be hosting a spoken word poets and for a performance and a panel that is centered on water stories. So if you're not already on our mailing list, you can join on our website, and I'll drop that link in the chat so you can receive updates when this registration link goes live. And we really appreciate you being here for this event, and we look forward to seeing you at future ones.